Greetings, I am Reverend Yue McCormick, Head Minister of En-Yuzan, Perfect Dragon Mountain, Shinganji, True Vow Temple of the Nichiren Shu Sangha of the San Francisco Bay Area. In this presentation of 4 parts, it is my goal to cover those things about the life and teachings of the historical Shakyamuni Buddha that Nichiren Shu expects its clergy to know. I feel that this might also be of interest to dedicated lay practitioners, as well as those who are curious about Buddhism and would like to know more about its founder and the basic teachings and practices that he taught. I will note that material appearing in red rather than black is material that is either not covered or not covered in detail in the book History and Teachings of Nichiren Buddhism, published by the Nichiren Shu Text Editorial Committee. This is material that I personally feel is important for Nichiren Buddhists to be familiar with, especially clergy and lay teachers. Now let's begin the third of the 4 parts, turning the wheel of the Dharma. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and other nearby trees for 7 weeks. After receiving Brahma's encouragement to teach, the Buddha decided to seek out the 5 ascetics at the deer park near Varanasi. These were Ajñata Kondinya, Bhadrika, Vaspa, Mahanaman, and Asvajit. On the way, he encountered the ascetic Upaka, who asked the Buddha what teaching he followed and who his teacher was. The Buddha told him that he had no teacher, and that he was in fact fully enlightened and able to teach the way to the deathless. Unfortunately, Upaka found this doubtful and merely replied, "May it be so, friend." He then went on his way and missed the opportunity to become the first disciple of the Buddha. This story shows that it is not enough to just see or hear the Buddha. There must also be an inner receptivity to his teaching and example, and a willingness to put his teachings into actual practice in order to benefit from them. When the Buddha finally arrived in the deer park, his former companions in asceticism saw him coming in the distance, but they still felt that they could not respect him because he had stopped practicing asceticism. However, as he came nearer, they found that they could not help but be courteous to him. They could tell that something was different about him, and eventually the Buddha was able to convince them that he was indeed fully enlightened and worthy of their reverence. He then turned the wheel of the Dharma for the very first time. He taught them about the middle way, about the 4 noble truths, which are the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the 8-fold path, or middle way, leading to the cessation of suffering, consisting of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Ajñata Kondinya was the first to get a glimpse of the truth, and he became a stream enterer, the first of 4 stages leading to complete liberation from birth and death. He immediately asked to become the Buddha's disciple. Ajñata Kondinya's request and the Buddha's acceptance became the formula whereby others would receive full admission into the Sangha directly from the Buddha. He asked, "Lord, I wish to go forth under the Blessed One and to receive the full admission." "Come, monk," the Blessed One said, "the Dharma is well proclaimed. Live the holy life for the complete ending of suffering." Over the course of the next several days, Vaspa, Bhadrika, Mahanama, and then Asvajit also realized the truth and became the Buddha's disciples, and thus the Sangha was born. The Buddha then followed up the teaching of the 4 noble truths by teaching them in more detail about the 4 seals of the Dharma, consisting of the impermanence of all phenomena, the unsatisfactory nature of all phenomena, that all phenomena are without a self, and that only nirvana is peace, and the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, which make up our lives and are characterized by the 3 marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. This last one, non-self, is held to be the particular teaching that made Buddhism unique among the other Vedic and non-Vedic teachings. Before long, all 5 of the former ascetics had become arhats and were no longer subject to rebirth. Here is what the Buddha said in that first discourse about the middle way. Bhikkhus, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What 2? the pursuit of sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial, and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which gives rise to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what, bhikkhus, is that middle way awakened by the Tathagata which gives rise to vision, which leads to nibbana? It is this noble eightfold path. Here is what the Buddha said in his first discourse about the Four Noble Truths. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, union with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is this noble eightfold path. Note that the five aggregates refers to the components of a sentient being. The Buddha taught that all physical and mental things and phenomena in this world consist of five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. Here is how the Buddha specifically defined each part of the Noble Eightfold Path in a later discourse. Right view, knowledge of suffering, knowledge of the origin of suffering, knowledge of the cessation of suffering, knowledge of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Right intention, intention of renunciation, intention of non-ill will, intention of harmlessness. Right speech, abstinence from false speech, abstinence from divisive speech, abstinence from harsh speech, abstinence from idle chatter. Right action, abstinence from destruction of life, abstinence from taking what is not given, abstinence from sexual misconduct. Right livelihood, here a noble disciple, having abandoned a wrong mode of livelihood, earns his living by a right livelihood. Elsewhere, the Buddha defined wrong livelihood as making a living by practicing the debased art of geomancy, the debased art of astrology, undertaking to go on errands and run messages, or by the debased art of palmistry. Right effort, non-arising of unarisen, unwholesome states, abandoning of arisen, unwholesome states, arising of unarisen, wholesome states, and maintenance of arisen, wholesome states. Right mindfulness. He dwells contemplating in the body, feeling in feelings, mind in mind, phenomena in phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. And right concentration. Secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the first jhana. In the second jhana, in the third jhana, and in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant and includes the purification of mindfulness by equanimity. After teaching the Four Noble Truths to the five ascetics, the Buddha saw that they still harbored attachment to the idea of self, the most fundamental delusion. In order to remedy this, the Buddha taught them how to finally relinquish the attachment to self by discussing the five aggregates in terms of the three marks of all phenomena, which are impermanence, suffering, and non-self. He taught, form is non-self, for if form were self, it would not lead to affliction, and it would be possible to have it of form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. It is impermanent, and what is impermanent is suffering, and what is suffering and subject to change is not fit to be regarded as mine, the I, or as oneself. The same is true of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Seeing thus, the monks that he was teaching felt revulsion, dispassion, and finally liberation from the five aggregates. The four seals of the Dharma are the three marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, which characterize all phenomena, with the addition of the quiescence or perfect peace of nirvana. Together, they are considered the four seals of the Dharma. Any teaching that conforms to the four seals can be considered authentic Buddha Dharma. Once the five ascetics had become bhikkhus or monks, as well as arhats, the three jewels or treasures that all Buddhists now take the threefold refuge in were manifest in the world. The three are the Buddha, the awakened teacher, the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, and the reality one awakens to, and the Sangha, or the community of awakened, or at least awakening practitioners. The three jewels can be understood as these three separate entities: teacher, teaching, and community of practitioners. However, they can also be understood as three aspects of a unified entity, as the Buddha's unsurpassed truth, the pure merit of his awakening to that truth, and the harmonized merit of his compassionate activity to convey that truth to liberate others. The three jewels can also be understood as the three ways in which they are manifest in the world, as statues of the Buddha, the sutras that contain the written Dharma, and the community of fellow practitioners. The conversion and awakening of the five ascetics was followed by the conversion of Yasha, the son of a wealthy merchant. Yasha became a monk, and his parents and wife took the threefold refuge and became lay followers. After this, 54 of Yasha's friends discovered what had happened, and they too sought out the Buddha's teachings, became arhats, and joined the Sangha. They all stayed at the deer park until the end of the rainy season. At that point, the Buddha sent his 60 arhat disciples out into the world in order to teach the Dharma. He told them, "Go now and wander for the welfare and happiness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and men. Teach the Dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the meaning and the letter." Upon leaving the deer park and sending his disciples forth to spread the Dharma, the Buddha traveled back to Uravilva near the town of Gaya. The Buddha then arrived at the banks of the Naranjara River in Uravilva. There he used his supernatural powers to win over the eldest of the three Kashyapa brothers, who were the leaders of 1,000 matted hair ascetics, whose main practice was the performance of the Vedic fire sacrifice. The elder, Uravilva Kashyapa, was especially hard to win over, since he arrogantly assumed that he was already an arhat. Seeing that the eldest Kashyapa was impressed but not humbled by his ability to tame the snakes in the fire hall or read Kashyapa's mind, the Buddha bluntly pointed out to him that he had not yet freed himself from defilement, nor was he doing anything whereby he might do so. Uravilva Kashyapa was finally convinced and became the Buddha's disciple. His followers did likewise, and soon his two younger brothers, Nadi Kashyapa, leader of 300 matted hair ascetics, and Gaya Kashyapa, leader of 200 matted hair ascetics, and their followers also joined the Sangha. Accompanied by the Kashyapa brothers and the 1,000 new arhats, the Buddha then traveled to Rajagriha, the capital of Magadha, in order to keep the promise he had made earlier to King Bimbisara that he would return and teach the Dharma if he should succeed in attaining enlightenment. It was during the Buddha's stay in Rajagriha that his two greatest disciples joined him, Shariputra and his lifelong friend Maudgalyayana. They were originally the leading disciples of the skeptical philosopher Sanjaya. When they both agreed to join Shakyamuni Buddha, 250 of Sanjaya's disciples came with them. When Shakyamuni Buddha saw the two friends coming to meet him, he announced to the assembly that these two would become his chief disciples. Shortly after the appearance of the two chief disciples, Mahakashyapa joined the Sangha. At this point, the Sangha had grown to more than 1,250 disciples. The first winter after the Buddha's enlightenment, he returned to Kapilavastu to teach the Shakyas. There, Rahula became a novice. 13 years later, he was given full ordination. Also during that visit, many Shakya nobles joined the monastic Sangha, including Ananda, Aniruddha, and Devadatta. Their barber, Upali, also joined the Sangha. Sometime after the Buddha began teaching in Shravasti, the capital of Koshala, he also attracted many new disciples from among the population and from among those who came to Shravasti on business. One of these new disciples was Subhuti. Another was Mahakatyayana. Finally, there was Purna, a wealthy Brahmin who had become an ascetic and then joined the Sangha as a monk after hearing the Buddha teach in Rajagriha. A couple of months after the end of the 5th rainy season retreat, the Buddha heard that his father, King Shuddhodana, was on his deathbed. The Buddha flew back, literally according to tradition, to Kapilavastu to be at his side. There he gave a final discourse to his father, who became an arhat as a result, just before passing away. The Buddha then stayed for a while at Nyagroda Park. According to tradition, it was during this stay at the Nyagroda Park that the Buddha's aunt and foster mother, Mahaprajapati, approached him and requested that he allow women to leave the home life and become nuns in the Sangha. She was herself now a widow upon the death of Shuddhodana and wanted to be ordained as a nun. The Buddha at first did not want to allow women to become wandering mendicants, but Ananda interceded on Mahaprajapati's behalf, and so the Buddha allowed Mahaprajapati to be ordained and a nun's order to be established. Among the Shakyan women who were ordained was Yashodhara, who had been living as a renunciate while at home ever since her husband Siddhartha had left to seek Buddhahood. Here then are the 10 principal male disciples of the Buddha, who all received predictions of Buddhahood in the Lotus Sutra, except Upali for some reason. There was Shariputra, foremost among those with great wisdom; Maudgalyana, foremost among those with supernatural power; Mahakasyapa, foremost of those who cultivate ascetic practices; Rahula, foremost among those who practice inconspicuously; Ananda, foremost among those who are learned; Upali, foremost among those who uphold the Vinaya, or monastic discipline; Subhuti, foremost among those who understand emptiness; Purna, foremost among those who teach the Dharma; Mahakatyayana, foremost among those who teach in detail; and Aniruddha, foremost of those with the divine eye. Other important lay believers, and in some cases their donations of land for monasteries, should also be noted. The first is King Bimbisara of Magadha. When the Buddha came to Rajagriha after his awakening, he taught the progressive teachings concerning generosity, self-discipline, and contemplation of the gods, and then the Buddha Dharma itself to King Bimbisara and the Brahmin householders of Rajagriha. The king and many others attained to stream entry as a result, and thereupon took refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha of monks, and became lay followers of the Buddha. The king invited the Buddha and his followers to dinner and then donated the bamboo grove just outside the city of Rajagriha to the Sangha, where they could dwell under the trees and in caves. Towards the end of the Buddha's life, King Bimbisara would be overthrown by his son, Prince Ajatashatru, who at the time was a patron of Devadatta. Ajatashatru would later be overcome by remorse and would go to the Buddha and repent of his evil deeds. Another important lay follower and benefactor was Anathapindika, a wealthy merchant from Shravasti, the capital of Kushala, whose actual name was Sudatta. His wife happened to be the sister of a wealthy merchant in Rajagriha, who had donated dwellings and invited Shakyamuni Buddha and his Sangha to a meal. Usually, when Anathapindika came to visit, his brother-in-law would fuss over him, but this time he was too busy making preparations for the Buddha and his monks. When Sudatta learned that there was someone believed to be a Buddha or awakened one in town, he had to meet him as soon as possible. He was unable to sleep that night in anticipation. As soon as it was dawn, he went to the park to meet the Buddha. That very morning, he received the Buddha's teachings, became a stream enterer, and took the threefold refuge. He then invited the Buddha to a meal that he would host the very next day at his brother-in-law's home, where he always stayed while in Rajagriha. His brother-in-law and even King Bimbisara all offered to help him pay for the meal, but Sudatta insisted on paying for it himself. When the day came and Sudatta had served the Buddha and the Sangha, he invited them to come to Shravasti, where he would build a monastery, wherein they could spend the rainy season retreat. The Buddha consented. Sudatta returned home and told all those he met on the way back that they should prepare lodgings for the Buddha, who would be following him with his monks. One of the most famous of these lodgings would be the great forest monastery in the city of Vaishali, the capital of the Lichavi tribe of the Vriji Confederacy. Upon arriving back in Shravasti, Sudatta went to Prince Jeta, one of the sons of King Prasenajit, and asked to buy the prince's park so that he could build a monastery on it for the Buddha and Sangha. Prince Jeta was at first not inclined to sell his park, so set what he believed to be a prohibitively high price. He stated that he would only sell it if Sudatta could cover the entire park with gold coins. Immediately, the wealthy merchant had cartloads of gold coins brought in and spread over the ground. Prince Jeta was so impressed by Sudatta's dedication that he changed his mind, and when one patch near the entrance of the park remained uncovered, he made that part his own contribution and had a gatehouse built there. The park was known thereafter as the Jeddah Grove Monastery. Another important patron was King Prasenajit of Koshala, the father of Prince Jeddah. He and his wife Malika became devout followers of the Buddha. Due to a palace intrigue, he was deposed by his son, Crown Prince Varudaka. He died of illness with only one lady in waiting at a common rest house outside the gates of Rajagriha, where he had gone to seek help from Ajatashatru. After seizing the throne from his father, Varudaka waged a war against the Shakya kingdom for past personal insults, killing many people, for which, it is said, he fell into the hell of incessant suffering. Soon after, he was burned to death during a drinking party aboard a ship on a river. During the Buddha's lifetime, his teachings are spread by disciples such as Purna, who went to the western coast, and Mahakatyayana, who returned to his homeland Avanti to spread the Dharma. After returning to Avanti, Mahakatyayana found it difficult to give the higher ordination to new disciples because it was difficult to find even 10 monks, the minimum needed to confer full admission into the Sangha. He also found that some of the precepts set forth by Shakyamuni Buddha were inappropriate for those living in Avanti, where the environment and customs were different from those found in the kingdom where the Buddha was teaching. To remedy this, Mahakatyayana sent one of his students, whom he had ordained after finally managing to find enough monks for the ordination, to see the Buddha and ask if the rules could be changed to fit the local customs and environment. The Buddha agreed to this and stated that in the outlying kingdoms it would henceforth be permissible for only 5 monks to confer the full admission. He also allowed monks to wear shoes, bathe more frequently, use hides for coverings, and wear an extra robe for a longer period of time in order to suit the local customs and the harsher environment of the outlying kingdoms like Avanti. This incident shows that the Buddha did allow for a certain amount of flexibility in the rules and regulations that he set forth, and that as long as the integrity of the Buddha Dharma was not harmed, he allowed for the adaptation of Buddhism to new circumstances. This allowed Buddhism to grow into a world religion. Buddhism naturally spread along the 2 major trade routes, the northern road going from Taxila and Gandhara down to Rajagriha and Magadha, and the southern road going from Patistana in the south to Shravasti. With that, I bring the third part of this 4-part presentation of the life and teachings of the historical Shakyamuni Buddha to a close. I hope that this presentation was helpful and informative and will help to enrich your faith in and practice of Nichiren Buddhism.